Tweet @TodaySOR.
Last weekend, in a homily at an ordination in Dublin, the Archbishop of Dublin, Dr. Judith Martin, told the congregation that Catholics were unfairly under attack as they live out their faith and their ministry. He said there's a sense in which they feel that it is time to stand up and respond. I'm joined now in studio by Independent Senator Ronan Mullen, former spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Dublin, and by Jane Donnelly from Atheist Ireland. The Archbishop Ronan Mullen was speaking at an ordination. Now, did you interpret his comments as being directed towards the clergy or the laity, or what way were they aimed?
Well, I don't know. I'd say maybe both. I suppose when we talk about the church, it's not just the clergy, obviously. I think coming from him, it'll be heard maybe by a lot of people because he's seen as the, if you like, the liberal voice within the Catholic hierarchy, and maybe there'll be people who would be critical of the Catholic Church that might be inclined to think, well, if Jane Martin is saying it, maybe there's something in this. But I think what he is saying is that there is this sense that the barrage of criticism against the Catholic Church is pretty relentless. I have to agree with him, but I do want to stress it's not about being in denial about the bad things that happened. It's more the concern that people are being encouraged to be forgetful. First of all, I suppose about the contribution that Christianity has made to the world and continues to make to the world, and secondly, maybe the lack of perspective on a whole range of debates going on in Ireland right now.
Yeah, Jane Donnelly of Atheist Ireland. Do you agree or otherwise with the Archbishop when he says there appears to be a culture of relentless reminding the Church of the sins of its members?
Well, I wouldn't think that's necessarily true. I mean, it's very difficult to forget those things that happened, especially in the laundries and the industrial schools and various things. But the church is still with us, and the institutionalised church is still with us. And I see, from my perspective, a lot of people campaigning to separate church and state. And in this country, the church still has a lot of privilege in different areas. They have a lot of control of the schools, and the state is just going to give them a maternity hospital. So I would be challenging that institutional power and privilege that the church has. But ordinary Catholics, of course, they're entitled to practice their religion in public and in the public square. And I want to see the church in the public square. They have an opinion like us all. We all have opinions, but they have privilege in that square, and that is where I think the challenge needs to lie.
And you mentioned about education and the current debate about the hospital, the maternity hospital. Yeah. And where else do you see that privilege being manifested in a way that it should be curtailed?
Well, I suppose you could put this into perspective. Ronan here is a committed, conscientious Catholic, and I am a committed, conscientious atheist. And because of that, Ronan can be President of Ireland. I can't. Ronan can be a High Court judge. He can be a judge. I can't. Ronan can be Taoiseach. I can't. Ronan can get his children, if he has any, I don't know, into any publicly funded school. I can't. And Ronan can get healthcare in accordance with his conscience. I can't.
That's quite a litany of discrimination, Ronan Mullen.
And more.
And some would say,
okay, well, look, pause it there.
And some would say it won't be tied them if I became Taoiseach. I think Jane's largely referring to the oath that has to be taken. And fair enough, I think one can look at these issues. But I met an elderly nun recently who said, I feel really hated now. And it's not that she was looking for sympathy, but it's almost as though they are kind of cowed into silence, that religious seem to feel, if we try and balance the ledger and say, hang on a minute, we have a right to provide healthcare if people want it, and we provide excellent healthcare. We're just coming out of a debate, or hopefully we're coming out of a debate where people have been obsessed about, painting a picture about nuns seeking to control healthcare.
I don't think that's fair to call it an obsession, is it?
Well, let me just say that when you actually look behind the story, what you see is a relentless kind of barrage of supposition. I get the impression that, in fact, the nuns, first of all, didn't manage to seal down the ethos of their institution into the future. But more to the point, you have this kind of sense that, a kind of a slandering that, Christian-run healthcare is bad healthcare. And the question is, why aren't and a lot of people are asking me and saying, why aren't the religious coming out and saying, hang on a minute, we've a right to provide Christian health facilities and in a pluralist society to exist alongside non-Christian ones and to get state funding if people want to use our services. It's called parity of esteem. But here's the problem, and I think there's maybe a misplaced theology among some religious that they feel kind of like, Christ was silent before his accusers. If we come out and defend ourselves, we'll be accused of being in denial about the wrongs that definitely took place, and we'll be accused of seeking special privilege. But I think what the religious need to remember is that it is wrong to slander the Christian input into education and healthcare. It's not about seeking control over whatever everybody else gets. It's about seeking to provide it as part of the marketplace. And that should be respected in a genuinely pluralist society. But I don't hear that voice coming from government, and I don't hear it from the senior elite medical people who seem to want to paint a different picture, a picture that I would say is way out of date.
Jane?
Well, what I would say to Ronan, he paints a very nice picture of everybody getting on together and equality and all that. But they have exemptions, religious hospitals and schools from our equality laws. For a lot of parents, they can't get their children into their local school, publicly funded school. Now, we're not talking about private institutions that have private money that are running those institutions themselves. We are talking here about publicly funded institutions in healthcare and in education. And minorities are discriminated against in getting access to those services. So there's no problem with the Catholic Church, or any church for that matter, having services and setting up private services, but it's the public funding of those services that is the problem. And if you look at this from our perspective, and for a long time we've been looking at it, I think, from the church's perspective, and it looks like with the government just handing over this hospital that they didn't even think of the sensitivity in relation to this. Why should our hospitals be run, publicly funded hospitals, be run by private institutions? And I think it was Pope Benedict that said, you can't have charity without evangelisation. So it goes hand in hand. The reason that they're in these public areas is to evangelise.
First of all, we should be looking for a win-win. I would completely support the need for schools for people who don't want to educate their children according to kind of a Christian vision of life. We don't have enough of those schools. I support tax-based funding for your point of view. Likewise with healthcare, in a pluralist society, there can be all sorts of providers. But here's the point. We had all this claim, and it's an unjust claim, that, Christian-run healthcare facilities will somehow be second class and we should keep the nuns out of it. At the same time...
It's not that they're second class. Just to reflect the argument, I think it's summarised by one of our texters. It's a tweet from Martin McMahon. Catholics have every right to be Catholics. What they don't continue to have is the right to ram it down everybody's throat. And in the context of the hospital, that would apply to the procedures that would or would not be available.
There is no ramming of anything down somebody's throat. If you had for example, at the very same... people talk about evidence-based. Like the same weekend that the Citizens' Assembly was coming up with a non-evidence-based case for aborting kids on economic grounds up to 22 weeks, or aborting children with Down syndrome and other disabilities on a free-for-all basis. That's the secular model. The Christian model says excellent healthcare and you protect every human life and human dignity. Now, I'm not saying in a secular state that every hospital should be a Catholic hospital, but a lot of people, whether they be people of faith or not, actually like that vision of excellent healthcare and protecting every patient who comes through the door, born or unborn.
And allowing a patient to choose a procedure which is legal, but which may not be in keeping with the particular ethos or teaching of the church.
If that procedure involves taking an innocent human life, I think it's more than just Catholics who would like state-funded hospitals that don't provide that.
Okay, well, that's that issue. What about something, say, for instance, like sterilisation?
I'm much less concerned about those issues. But what I would say is, if we're genuinely pluralist, we will allow different people into the marketplace and say, you know what, as long as there are hospitals when state-sanctioned procedures are available to people, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the state dealing with other hospitals who operate according to, let's face it, a Christian ethos ethos that has huge credibility in healthcare over centuries, and say, why would we be so intolerant as to push them out of the marketplace if a certain section of the tax-paying public wants them to be there?
Is it about pushing them out of the marketplace, Jane?
Well, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that we're going to have a hospital for different religions or different, worldviews of religion, whether it's a hospital for Islamists and a hospital for Christianity. It's just not going to work like that. And it's not going to work like that in the education system. We can't, in a small town, have a school for every different religion. There's over 126 different religions. And Ronan talked about pluralism there, and this is a pluralist country. But even if you look at what the Catholic Church would say about pluralism in relation to abortion, even what they say is that politicians haven't got a choice. If they have a Catholic conscience, they must vote along with Catholic doctrine in the way in any policy or any laws. They're not allowed to take pluralism into account.
I think the problem in Ireland in recent years is that politicians haven't been allowed to vote according to their personal convictions, and they've been kicked out of their parties when they did that. But can we just get back to the issue? Because let's agree that there should be some kind of pluralism where different styles are allowed breathe in the same society.
Without privilege.
But if you have every voice catered for and different sections of the community catered for, well, you see, then what you end up is you are actually trying to impose a new kind of ethos, which I think is just as intolerant as the old. But I think it's important, Sean, in fairness, to make this point. Victoria White has a really important piece in the Irish Examiner today, in basically highlighting the lack of acknowledgement and the unfairness of dismissing the excellent contribution by religious, particularly in healthcare, over the years. And why is that important? Because it's not just about fairness to the religious. As I said, they may not necessarily want to speak up for themselves, although I believe they should, because there is a slandering of Christian healthcare, Christian education that shouldn't be happening. But there's another issue here. I believe that because you have a very activist media in this country, like over the weekend of the Citizens' Assembly, I think there was about 30 or 40 articles absolutely going bananas about the maternity hospital situation on the basis of a misplaced...
Well, maybe arguing strongly on the case.
Here's the point. Why are they so activist? Because it's about seeking to influence other debates, and there's a manipulation of people going on by focusing only on the evils of the past but not acknowledging the good. Sorry, of course.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. The Catholic point of view, it's very hard to get a word in sometimes.
That's not fair. I'm going to listen to you now, and I'm going to listen to you now. Yeah.
I don't agree with Ronan. It is a pluralist country, but you cannot give everybody in a small town or in a city access to the healthcare in the way that they seem fit. So the state has to be neutral, and it has to be neutral, and it has to be equal and pluralist to all different religious and philosophical convictions. Now, that's not saying that you have a perfect right, and I accept that you are a conscientious Catholic and you believe that. But that's...
Well, don't canonise me either now. I'm just a person that believes in the right of...
Just let her continue, please.
You're interrupting me again there. Sorry. But you have to accept that I don't believe what you believe. And I don't... Now, let me finish, please. And this is maybe the issue. He won't listen to me, or they won't listen. Sometimes I have found that over the years as I've growing up, that they won't listen to the secularist point of view. And you want to evangelise, you want to have the Catholic way of life and control that, and I see it as control over the years in different ways of life, and you want that reflected in law and policy in Ireland, and I want to see them separated, and we want a voice that sees them separated, and we want equality for all religions. And remember, there are minority religions in Ireland that get discriminated against because of the power of the institutionalised church.
We seem to hear nothing else but the secularist point of view, and you can't blame me for... You can't blame me, RTE Radio. And you're doing very well, and fair play to you, but you can't blame me for interrupting you when you try and put labels on me, which actually misrepresent where I'm coming from. I want you to be able to have your values. What I don't want you saying is that the state should somehow dictate the same ideology across the board. Let's say, I firmly believe, by the way, the Irish people probably won't legalise abortion in the end, but let's say they did. Are we really saying that any healthcare facility which says, actually, we have to protect all human life here here and we're going to offer a different vision, a vision that would be attractive to many non-believers as well as believers, are we really saying that they should be starved of funding unless every single one of them provides facilities that the state now insists on?
An institution doesn't have a conscience. It's individual doctors and nurses in a health facility that have the conscience, and that is what you protect. So obviously if you were going to deny healthcare or deny services to somebody, there would have to be some legislation or some policy there in that regard. But institutions don't have a conscience.
It's funny you should say that, because I have some experience of working at the Council of Europe level, and a few years ago we managed to turn back a report that was trying to crush people's rights of conscience in this very area. And it will, I'd say, try being a doctor in Britain who doesn't believe abortion is right, and try getting a qualification in obstetrics.
Well, try being the
top people in obstetrics in Britain, and I'm thinking of one guy in particular who was brought in to chair a report here a few years ago. What he would do routinely, and what is considered routine practice, is to inject potassium chloride into an unborn baby 21 weeks in the womb as the best way of ending that life. That's what the great and the good get up to. And I'm not saying he's not technically competent as an obstetrician. All his colleagues are, but they are completely divorced from good ethics of protecting vulnerable human life.
It is a pity there was no somebody in the hospital when Savita Hannapanifer was dying that had a conscience to do something about the situation that she found herself in.
Let's just hear Jane Donnelly to finish that point.
And there are doctors and nurses that have conscience, and that want to provide those services to women, and that we have to respect their conscience. It's always about and the doctors that want to deny the health service. It's to women. It's never about the doctors that want to provide that. They have a conscience too. Secular parents like myself and others, we all have consciences.
And patient choice as well.
And let everybody live. You know, the great time-honoured principles in medicine, and you know, you don't have to be a Christian to admire this. Tons of non-Christians admire this as well, is do no harm and do as much good as possible. And it's a sad day if it takes Christian hospitals to defend that principle. You shouldn't need to be a Christian to see the point.
Other doctors that haven't got that
what
point.
I'm saying I'm not putting anybody down. What I'm saying is that medicine needs ethics, and there's no good being a highly qualified obstetrician if you don't care about the innocent unborn child that nobody wants at a given moment. Good ethics is about protecting human life in all situations.
That's not fair to doctors. You're telling other doctors that are pro-choice that they are unethical.
Sure, I'm entitled to my opinion about what's ethical and not. Are you going to close down free speech altogether?
There's no doctors here to defend themselves either. I would see them as ethical. I would see them as protecting and giving the woman autonomy and protecting the life of the mother. So I don't agree with him in that. But he's entitled to his opinion. So there are two different routes.
But all I'm saying is it's extremely intolerant to insist that our healthcare system would exclude doctors who actually do care about both lives, Jane.
Yeah, and doctors that care about the life of the woman, and that doctors that would have intervened to help women in Ireland that have died in hospitals such as Savita.
That's so unfair. Savita was nothing to do with abortion. That was a mismanagement of sepsis.
I'm sorry.
This is a matter of law.
We need you to take. Hold on. Sorry. We need you to take turns on this one. Just the subject of Savita Hannapanifer. The late Savita Hannapanifer has come up now. Your point is that if abortion was permissible in this country, she would still be alive.
Yes. And my point is as well that doctors that have a conscience as well. It's always about doctors that don't want to provide abortions, but it goes the other way.
To come back on the Savita case,
3 different reports, official reports, established that it was the mismanagement of sepsis. Under Irish law, a woman has always been entitled to necessary healthcare treatment. The tragedy was that they did not realise there was sepsis there, and you see that's an example of how the debate gets used to invoke that poor woman's memory. To try and slander a Christian-run healthcare system is really wrong.
Let's hear Jane, sorry.
I'm a woman and I've had children. That is an unfair thing to say to me. She asked if she had got an abortion when she asked for one, and it was obvious she was miscarrying it, she could be, as Professor Boylan said, still alive here.
If they had known that her life was in danger, she would have got whatever treatment was needed, and it's really unfair to ignore that. But you see, this is why I think
her autonomy as a a woman, and that is what people are looking for. If she had her autonomy as a woman and got an abortion when she asked for one, which she should have got one, and was respected, and her wishes were respected.
The trouble was,
but it was the legislation in Ireland didn't let her.
No, it was not. It was that they did not apprehend that her life was at risk, and they did not take it. But it's unfair, and this is what is happening in Ireland.
Why didn't they give her the abortion when she asked for it?
This is because they didn't apprehend that her life was at risk. It's very obvious. But why
didn't they give her the abortion?
You asked me not to interrupt you. Please let me make a point now. This is my point, that what we actually have is a constant targeting of a kind of an anti-Catholic feeling in society, and the aim is to kind of move on certain political debates instead of debating the facts. And I think we would have a better quality of debate if we said, listen, can we debate issues on their merits, rather than trying to constantly blacken people's reputations.
But he is being political, and it is political because they are trying to, and what they do is get the laws and policy to reflect their belief system. That is what they do, and that's how it works. That is the social policy of the Catholic Church.
We are entitled to different views and values
on the point, to come back to the Archbishop's address at that ordination, he talked about Catholics, committed Catholics somehow being unfairly under attack as they live out their faith, and there's a sense in which they feel it is time to stand up and respond. Now, one of the interesting things about the last 2 weeks in this country, Ronan Mullen, is during the debates, be it about the National Maternity Hospital or other ones, it's impossible to get a bishop to come out and say where they stand, or to get representatives of St. Vincent's Hospital to explain why they should have the control of that hospital.
I agree.
So where's all this about responding? I just, as a former spokesperson for the Dublin Catholic Archdiocese, what's your view of that?
You're bang on the money. Well, first of all, I believe it's hugely unhealthy, because, as I said, what has been said is that there was nobody coming out and saying, hang on a minute, we should be proud of our Christian ethics and our Christian healthcare system.
And equally, we have Doran to explain his view of things.
Yeah, but the other point is, and I think what the religious sometimes forget is that if they are silent, whether it's out of humility or because they feel they won't get a hearing, or whether it's because they're old and tired, as many of them are, there is a wider damage that is being done to public debate. I would say, though, it isn't about kind of Catholics saying, let's fight back and seek privileges for ourselves. I know there was an item, for example, a few weeks ago on the Late Late Show where some guy referred to the Eucharist as haunted bread, and it caused outrage, and there was complaints into RTE, which were probably laughed at upstairs.
I'm not sure that's a fair way to put it. I'm sure they were taken very seriously.
Well, I don't think
because all complaints are taken seriously.
I don't believe they are, because you don't see a change in behaviour in the media when really. But to be honest with you, my point is, I actually don't mind people being, mocking the Eucharist. The real problem is that we don't actually bring the voices in who will give maybe a more traditional perspective. Well, I think it is actually. There's a lot, particularly in light entertainment. And if you take somebody like Ray D'Arcy, 3 times the BAI, Jean, has found him to be biased. Nothing is happening. No apology.
He can deal with his own show.
But if somebody doesn't deal with him, he won't bother. That's the point.
Sorry, yes, Donnelly. We really have to wrap this now.
This is the Catholic thing. You can't get a word in.
No, it's not.
Actually, I'll blame the BBC here now, not RTE. But there was a Cardinal, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who got up on the BBC a few years ago and said that atheists were not fully human. So it works both ways.
Okay, we're going to leave the BBC again to its own affairs. My thanks to you both, Ronan Mullen, Independent Senator, and Jane Donnelly of Atheist Ireland. Thank you very much. We hope to see you back in the studio again. If this, as you say, it was your first time, well spoken. We'll be talking to Paddy about the so-called death taxes at Dardistan Cemetery after the break.
Today with Sean O'Rourke on RTE Radio 1.